let's move on to the fundamentals of financial management in sports. Technically, financial management is a discipline that can be broken in smaller parts, each of them important in their own areas. The most famous probably being corporate finance, but as well as investments, financial institutions, and international finance. The definition of financial management can be succinctly put as the discipline of planning, organizing, directing, and controlling the financial activities of an organization. Sport finance, by extension, is financial management applied to sport as a very specific industry. So that leaves us with a question. What does a sport manager do? Does he only concern himself with sport, or he has to worry about the financial aspects of his club, his organization, or his own career? A sports manager should be all in one package, meaning that they have to have knowledge of accounting, finance, risk management, strategic planning, ethics, and everything that concerns money or money generating aspects of their business. They have a lot of responsibilities within the organization, monitoring all the cash flow coming in and going out, understanding the organization's fundamentals, keeping track of expenses, fees, donations, and so on, cutting unnecessary expenditure from the budget, so cost control, inquiring into all kinds of matters where needed, viewing and reading and understanding all financial statements, seeing where the big expenses are coming from, as well as where the biggest cash generating activities are, then devising specific plans, keeping to it, finding the best insurance price and quality, and remaining up to date on all tax related issues, as well as preparing reports and submitting them to the appropriate authority. But apart from being a sports manager, you can also have a very specific career within sports that is related directly to finance. So you can also be a director of finance within an organization, a club, and so on. You can also be a financial administrator, you can be a financial analyst, you can be an agent, or you can be a sports entrepreneur and start a business that is directly related to sport. However, your basic role will be working with sport assets. And what are sport assets in this term? Most of the time, sport assets are players in one form or another. If we're talking about players as assets, this is exactly the commodification that we were referring to at the beginning, because we have to worry about the value of our sports assets, the risk versus return, and asset allocation, meaning if we're talking in sports vocabulary, what is the value of our player? What is the risk of them injuring themselves or maybe leaving to join a different club? Or how much money should we allocate to buying each player and bringing them to raise the value of our own club? Let's talk about financial institutions for a little bit. Those are companies that usually specialize in financial matters that are relevant to sports. The most important, apart from sports clubs and sports organizations, are sport agencies, banks, both commercial and investment, that provide the backing for buying some big sports assets, insurance companies, as well as brokerage firms. There's plenty of job opportunities in sports finance. Some of the most famous people in sports today are actually not athletes. Those are their agents, such as Mino Raiola, Jorge Mendes, and so on and so forth. These people are the movers and shakers of the sports industries, even though most of them have not had any remarkable sport careers themselves. At the end, we have international finance, which is a subdiscipline of finance and can allow you to create a career for yourself by within each of the specializations discussed so far, but on a global scale. And these are careers that are very sought after, that are very well paid, and that are looking for some very specific financial skills and knowledge, which you can obtain by following this course. So, why study finance? You have to study finance in order to be able to provide the backing for all of the other functions within your sports organization or a club. The marketing function, the accounting function, the management function, and especially the personal finance function, where you can actually even help your athletes organize their budgets and their careers so that they will have something left in the end of their sport days. But business finance is something that you will most likely do at some point. Why? Because you will have to answer some of the following questions. What are the long-term investments that you have to do in order for the organization to survive? Do you have to get a new venue where your matches can be played, or do you want to get a new player that will improve your sport success? Where will you get your sport financing in order to achieve this goal? Will you go to the bank? Will you go for equity financing? How will you manage your everyday financial activities? That is what business finance does. So, if you want to get a job in sports, also in sports finance, there is so much to choose from. You can start in professional sports, you can move on to sports goods, to sports retailing, to fitness or sports tourism, to amateur or recreational sports, or sports medicine. All of these disciplines require some knowledge of finance, and you can always find a niche for yourself where you can use up your financial skills. Some of the biggest financial management decisions that you have to make concern capital budgeting, capital structure, and the working capital management. What does this mean? It means that you have to decide yourself what will be the long-term investments or projects that your organization or club will have to undertake. The second one is concerned with capital structure and deciding how will you pay for your assets, and finally, how will you manage your day-to-day finances in the end. So the big question is, what is the main goal of financial management? Or what should be the goal of a sports organization? To maximize profits, to minimize costs, to maximize market share, to maximize the current value of its shares of stock, or to maximize sports success? It is up to you to decide. The question borders on some ethical issues, but above all, you have to remember that in order for you to be successful in terms of sports, you have to survive in terms of finance. There's one specific issue in finance that is directly relatable to the issue of sports, and that is the so-called agency problem. What is an agency problem? It's something that economists and people in finance have studied for a long time, and refers to the agency relationship, where a principal hires an agent to represent his or her interests. In terms of sports, this means that fans, who are sometimes the owners of a club, are actually the principals, whereas the managers are the agents in this agency relationship. So technically, fans or owners of a club or sports organization hires managers to run the sports organization or the club as a successful company. Where's the problem here? The problem is in the agency relationship, because there is an inherent conflict of interest between the principal and the agent. Because what the fans want is a lot of times not what the club managers want. This is why we have some very high agency costs in sports, because a lot of the times, and there's some very specific examples in the past, such as, for instance, the choices that Real Madrid have made or Manchester United have made in terms of buying players and foregoing some other issues have made the headlines in the news. And these were all agency relationships where directors or club presidents were acting directly in conflict with their fans' wishes because they had the power to decide, even though their power was not directly derived, but it was in turn delegated to them from the principals, and that is the club owners or the fans. Managing sports managers a lot of times is a difficult task to do. Why? Because first of all, you have to give them very high managerial compensation and sometimes even tied to their sports success. A lot of times you have to maintain corporate control, and you have to include other stakeholders that are essential to the survival and success of your club or organization. And there is one specific issue that every single person is interested in that is not directly related to finance, but is directly related to money, and those are tax issues. Whatever the size of your organization or your club, at one point you will come across the government in their request for tax. So why do you need to understand taxes? First of all, not to get in trouble with the government. Second of all, to be able to pay the right amount of money. And third, to make savings whenever possible. And although sports presents a very large area, each situation can be very specific and can be also tied to the country where the sport is positioned. There are four main tax types that may affect your club. The first one is the income tax, and that is if you as a sports organization or a club make any profits, the government will want a portion of that. Second, payroll taxes. If you employ any people as full-time employees within your sports organization, you will have to pay salaries, and part of it will have to go through payroll. Then value-added taxes. If you sell goods or services, such as merchandise or even food at the stands, you will have to pay VAT. And finally, property taxes. If you own any real estate, you will have to pay the government a portion of it for operating on that piece of land, or for even selling it if you decide to do so. A lot of times sports are exempt from paying taxes. Some of the most frequent exemptions relate to non-trading, mutual trading, community or amateur sports clubs, or even clubs having charity status. And if you ask yourselves if a club should register for VAT, the question is, it depends. Please check with your local tax office. All in all, the sports industry is not just elite sports. It's conceived of a lot of different activities where you can find your niche and make a career out of it. But make sure that you know your possibilities and you know exactly what you're looking for. There are mass participation sports and people who have made great careers without being very successful in elite sports and vice versa. The most important thing is to know yourself and know where you can make the most out of it.